Rain poured down that night, as Daniel sat alone inside his small wooden cabin on the edge of town. He had been living quietly for almost 3 years now, away from the noise of the city and the people who had once judged him. The soft hum of thunder in the distance reminded him of the storms he used to chase when life still had meaning. He had lost nearly everything: a job he loved, friends he trusted, and the woman who once promised to stay forever. His heart had grown still, like the wind before a storm, waiting for nothing and no one. He had just poured himself a cup of coffee when he heard a faint knock at the door. At first he thought it was the wind, but then came another knock, louder this time, shaky and desperate. He frowned, set down the mug, and opened the door. Standing there, soaked from head to toe, was a young woman clutching her arms around herself. Her clothes were drenched, her hair tangled by the rain, and her eyes looked terrified but determined. "Please," she said between short breaths. "Please, and let me in." "I have nowhere else to go," Daniel hesitated. He didn't know her. But something in her voice carried real pain, something that reached through the walls he had built around himself. He stepped aside silently and she entered. He handed her a towel and gestured toward the fireplace, where a weak flame tried to survive. She sat there quietly, shivering, trying to warm her hands. He finally spoke. "You lost?" She nodded. "Kind of. I was running from people who don't want me around." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why would anyone not want you around?" She turned to him, tears welling up. "Because I made a promise they don't understand." Her voice broke and she took a shaky breath. "I told someone I'd give birth to his child, and now everyone says I'm crazy." Daniel froze. He wasn't sure he had heard her right. There was no anger in her tone, just sadness and exhaustion. "You told who?" he asked softly. She looked straight into his eyes, her lips trembling. "The man who saved my life. He helped me when I had no one. I told him I'd do anything to repay him, even if it meant giving life to something that would remind him he wasn't alone. But then, he left. Everyone said I was foolish, that he'd never come back." Daniel leaned against the table, trying to piece together her words. There was sincerity in her voice, not madness. She spoke like someone who had lost her direction but still carried hope in her heart. He offered her a blanket and said, "Rest. You're safe here tonight." She hesitated again, her fingers tightening around the fabric. "If I stay," she whispered, "will you turn me away in the morning?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No one's turning you away." Something in his calm voice made her eyes soften. She whispered a quiet thank you and sat near the fire again. For a few minutes there was only silence, broken by the sound of rain and the crackling wood. Daniel watched her, wondering who she really was. She looked young, maybe in her mid-20s, and there was something both fragile and strong about her, like a flower that had survived too many storms. He noticed the small bag near her feet, the kind people carry when they leave home in a hurry. After a long pause, he asked, "What's your name?" She smiled faintly. "Anna," he nodded. "Daniel." Anna repeated his name quietly as if testing it. Then she said, "You look like someone who's been alone too long." He gave a half smile. "You're not wrong." They didn't talk much after that. She eventually fell asleep on the couch, her face peaceful under the soft light of the fire. Daniel covered her with another blanket and stood there for a moment, wondering why he felt something stirring inside, a sense of responsibility, maybe even care for this stranger. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Sunlight spilled through the small window, painting the wooden floor in gold. Daniel made breakfast and the smell of eggs and coffee filled the room. When Anna woke up, she smiled shyly. "It's been a long time since someone made me breakfast." "Eat," he said simply. "You'll need your strength." She nodded and began to eat slowly, her hands still trembling a little. After a while, she asked, "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Daniel looked out the window before replying. "Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. I never forgot that." Anna listened quietly, her eyes soft with understanding. "Then maybe that's why I was sent here," she said softly. "To return what was once given." Daniel didn't respond. He wasn't sure if he believed in fate anymore. But when he looked at her, something in his chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt for years. As the day passed, she helped him with small things around the cabin, folding clothes, washing dishes, feeding his old dog that barked every time she came near. Slowly, laughter began to return to that quiet home. But later that evening, as the sky turned orange, Daniel found her outside, sitting on the porch steps, staring at the fading horizon. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I don't know where to go, but I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said. "You can stay until you figure things out." Tears filled her eyes again, and before he could say anything more, she whispered, "Then let me stay. Please, I'll do anything. I'll even give you the family you lost." Daniel's heart skipped. He didn't understand what she meant at first, but when he saw her expression, sincere, broken, and yet full of warmth, he realized she wasn't speaking about obligation or pity. She was speaking from a place of deep gratitude and love she didn't yet fully understand. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "You don't owe me anything, Anna." She wiped her tears, smiling weakly. "Maybe not, but maybe I need to believe that some promises can still be kept." For a long time they stood there in silence, the world around them turning quiet. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, and the first stars began to appear. Finally, Daniel said softly, "Then stay with me." Her eyes widened slightly and her lips trembled. She nodded slowly, and for the first time since that stormy night, she smiled. A real, unguarded smile. Inside the small cabin, two broken souls had found a fragile beginning. Neither of them knew what the next day would bring, but for now the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. The morning light slipped through the curtains and woke Daniel before the birds began to sing. He stretched his arms, and for a moment, he forgot that someone else was in the house. Then he heard the soft sound of dishes clinking and water running. Anna was already awake, standing by the sink, wearing one of his old shirts that nearly reached her knees. Her hair was tied back, and there was a calm look on her face. She turned and smiled when she saw him. "Good morning," she said softly. He nodded, still half asleep. "You're an early riser." "I used to help my grandmother in the mornings," she replied. "Old habits never leave." He watched her move around the small kitchen like she had always belonged there. Something about it made the place feel alive again. For months it had been silent, only the sound of the wind and his own footsteps. But now there was warmth, the smell of coffee, and the sound of someone humming softly. As the day went on, they fell into a simple rhythm. She helped him clean the cabin, tend the small garden, and even brush the old dog that followed her everywhere. Daniel noticed how she talked to the dog as if it could understand every word. She had a kindness that came naturally, the kind that didn't need to be spoken. After lunch, they sat outside. The mountains in the distance were covered in fog, and the air smelled fresh after last night's rain. Anna sat on the porch step, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked peaceful, but there was still something hidden in her eyes, a story she hadn't shared yet. "Anna," Daniel said quietly, "you said you were running from people. Who were they?" She stayed silent for a moment, then sighed. "My family. They didn't believe in the choices I made. When I said I wanted to bring a child into this world for someone I cared about, they said I had lost my mind. They called me a disgrace." Daniel frowned. "That's harsh." "You were just trying to do something good," she nodded. "It wasn't about me. I met a man once, a kind soul who saved me when my car broke down on an empty road at night. He didn't even ask my name. He just helped, smiled, and left. But his kindness stayed in my heart. I never saw him again, but I wanted to honor that moment somehow. I thought maybe if I brought kindness into the world the way he did, maybe that was how I could thank him." Daniel listened carefully, and something about her words touched him deeply. He realized she wasn't foolish, she was simply someone who believed too much in good, and maybe the world had punished her for that. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said quietly. "She believed the same way you do. She used to tell me that kindness is a kind of promise we make to the world." Anna looked at him with interest. "What happened to her?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Life happened. People change, and I forgot how to believe." Anna reached over and touched his hand lightly. "Then maybe I can remind you." The touch was gentle, not romantic, just honest. It was enough to make Daniel feel something stir again. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let her hand rest there. Days passed. She began writing in a small notebook she carried everywhere. When Daniel asked what she was writing, she said, "Little moments I want to remember. I used to write them for someone else, but now I think I'm writing them for us." She wrote about simple things: the sound of rain on the roof, the taste of tea, the warmth of the fireplace. She even wrote about Daniel's quiet laugh, something he didn't know he still had. One evening, When the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, Daniel found her standing by the fence, tears glimmering in her eyes. He walked up quietly. "What's wrong?" She shook her head. "Nothing's wrong, I just realized I haven't felt safe like this in years." He smiled gently. "You are safe here. I promise." She looked at him for a long moment. "You shouldn't make promises you don't mean." "I mean it," he said firmly. "You're not going anywhere unless you want to." That night they sat together by the fire again. The sound of logs crackling filled the silence. Daniel told her stories from his past, how he once worked in the city, how his dreams had fallen apart, and how he came here to start over but never really did. Anna listened without judgment, her eyes soft and patient. Then she told him something she had never told anyone. "Before I left home, I went to the hospital. I told the doctor I wanted to donate life. Not literally, but to help someone who couldn't have children. I wanted to do something meaningful, but everyone said it was wrong. They said I was trying to replace love with duty. I didn't understand that. To me, love and duty were the same thing." Daniel looked at her, speechless. There was something beautiful and painful in her honesty. "Anna," he said quietly, "you don't need to prove your worth by giving yourself away. You already are enough." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "No one ever told me that before." He reached out, gently wiping a tear from her face. "Now you've heard it." Time passed and their bond grew stronger. They started fixing the broken parts of the cabin together, painting the walls, planting new flowers outside. It wasn't grand or romantic, it was real, like two people trying to rebuild their lives side by side. One evening, Anna found an old picture on the shelf. It was of Daniel with a woman and a little boy. She looked at it quietly, then asked, "Who are they?" He took a deep breath. "My wife and son. They're gone." Her heart ached. "I'm sorry." He nodded slowly. "After the accident, I stopped believing I could be anyone's anything again." Anna placed the photo back on the shelf gently. "Maybe that's why I came here," she said softly. "Not to be anyone's anything, but to remind you that love doesn't always end. It just changes shape." Daniel looked at her, really looked, and saw the truth in her words. She wasn't someone lost or broken anymore. She was someone who had brought life back into a home that had forgotten how to breathe. Weeks turned into months. The seasons began to change. One morning, while Daniel was chopping wood outside, Anna came to him holding a letter. "It's from my family," she said. "They finally want to see me," he smiled. "That's good news." She nodded, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I'll go see them, but I want you to know something before I leave." He paused, waiting. She stepped closer, her voice trembling slightly. "When I said I'd give birth to someone's child, I didn't mean it the way people thought. I meant I'd bring new hope, new kindness into someone's life. And I think I already have." Daniel swallowed hard. "You did, Anna, you really did." She smiled softly. "Then my promise is kept." They stood there in silence for a long time. Then Daniel said, "Stay with me, Anna." Her eyes filled with tears again, the same way they had that first night. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Yes, not because I need saving, but because life feels real again when you're here." She smiled through her tears and whispered, "Then I'll stay." And she did. In that quiet cabin at the edge of town, two hearts that had forgotten how to trust learned again what it meant to stay. Not out of duty, not out of fear, but out of choice. The promise that began in the rain had turned into something beautiful. Not all love stories begin with grand gestures. Some start with a knock on the door, a storm outside, and the courage to let someone in.